Hello and welcome to the course. I'm Jody, your host today, and I'm speaking with Professor Anastasia Giannakidou. Professor Giannakidou teaches in the Department of Linguistics. She is also the founder and director of the Center for Hellenic Studies and co-director of the Center for Gesture, Sign, and Language. She's the author of numerous books and publications and is currently working on a new manuscript in Greek, which has her writing in her native language for the first time in 30 years. She's here to talk to us about her career path and how she became a University of Chicago professor. Welcome to the course, Professor Giannakidou.
So I am Anastasia Giannakidou. I'm a professor of linguistics at the Department of Linguistics in the college. I am also the director of the Center for Hellenic Studies of the university and a co-director of the Center for Gesture, Sign, and Language. I've been at the University of Chicago for 22 years now. Wow, it's been a long time. And it has generally been a very pleasant journey being here. I'm excited to be able to do all the things that I have done and I'm currently doing. Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. 22 years is a long time. And I know from speaking with your colleagues that the University of Chicago is a very exciting place. And I can't wait to hear more about what, the experiences that you've had there and the teaching and research. Before we get to what you're doing now at the University of Chicago, let's roll back the clock a little bit and tell me a little bit about when you were young and what you were interested in as a young person and that might have led you to becoming an academic.
Right. So I must say that I was born in Greece. So I was not born in the United States. I was actually born in a small town in Greece. It's called Katerini. It's very close to Thessaloniki, which is the second biggest city in Greece. My hometown is by Mount Olympus. It's really a very beautiful place. I still feel nostalgic about it and visit it every summer when I get the chance to go back. I grew up in a family with a teacher in the house. My mother was a teacher. So there was always discussion about teaching and language and the value of education in our home. I moved on to college after taking a very strict exam. It's a very tough national exam that you have to take in Greece. I think in other countries, there's a similar custom as well. So I took this exam and I entered the Faculty of Philosophy at the University of Thessaloniki. And Faculty of Philosophy is another word for humanities, like the division of humanities at that university. I studied linguistics and philosophy. Those were my two majors, with a little bit of Greek in the sense of classical Greek philology. I also completed a master's in the philosophy of language at the University of Thessaloniki. And then in 1992, I decided to accept an Erasmus scholarship. These were scholarships provided by the European community at the time. And I went to the Netherlands for 6 months initially. And those 6 months ended being like almost 6 years. After it was indeed a very fateful decision that I made when I moved over there. And so I found a very hospitable place in the Netherlands at the Department of Dutch, which is where I did my PhD. And after I finished my PhD, I got my first job at the University of Amsterdam at the Department of Philosophy, actually. And then from there, the road opened, and in 2001, I moved to Chicago, where I joined the faculty here, initially as a visiting professor, and then after 2002, as a regular assistant professor. Yeah, so it was quite a long trajectory, and it involved moving through, 2 continents and essentially immigrating twice. Yeah, for me.
Yeah. So I'd love to break that. You gave us so much information so quickly. If we could break it down a little bit. So growing up, Greek was your first language, I imagine, and you're growing up in the shadow of Mount Olympus and surrounded by the mythological culture of. So tell us a little bit more about how language permeated your childhood.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. So language is very essential I think to all Greeks, it's the one steady characteristic we have throughout our history. Greeks have changed religion, they have changed location, but language is the one thing that identifies us culturally. And so it's something that is encouraged in the educational system. We learn classical Greek very early on in middle school, for instance. We often do comparison between modern Greek and classical Greek. A lot of value is placed in teaching language at school. Unlike, I must say that, in the United States, where teaching language or the mechanics of language or comparing languages is not something that you find in the school curriculum, at least not before high school. Literature is taught, but I'm talking about the mechanics of language, grammar. So I learned a lot of, like, I did ancient Greek, Latin, French at school, German later in college. And so a natural curiosity arose about language. At the same time, we also did philosophy, and language also plays a central role in philosophical thinking. Again, in the Greek canon of ideas, we have this concept of logos, which we find in words such as sociology, anthropology, and so forth. It's the second compound there. That logos indicates the underlying principle of rationality that is expressed through language, and which is what characterizes humans as a species. So I was very much, like, from very early on, encouraged to think along these lines, connect language to reasoning, try to use a kind of rational understanding in, how in figuring out how things work when it comes to language, but also when it comes to other things. So I think generally, like, the atmosphere was such that it encouraged thinking about language. And I guess I was also naturally interested in that. And that's why I decided to pursue study that had to do with language. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I know from looking at your website a little bit that you have continued to love this comparative study of language.
Mm-hmm.
What are some other languages you were exposed to early on that help to foment that interest in looking across languages to understand culture?
Right. I indeed, like, I continued learning. I learned German, as I said, at college, and then Dutch when I lived in the Netherlands. I'm very proud to say that I defended my PhD thesis in Dutch, which I opted to do. I had the choice to do in English as well. And I did have two professors coming from the United States, so I did answer their questions in English. But yeah, I decided to do that because I thought it's a challenge whenever you speak a new language or you learn a new language. You learn, you immerse in a new culture in a more genuine way, and I always liked doing that. That, of course, also kind of stimulated my interest in the relation between language, thought, and culture, and that's also something that is a steady in my own trajectory as a thinker. Thinking about language and thought is something that I've been doing a lot, thinking about meaning, and how meaning and meaningfulness is captured through language, and how it may be relativized with respect to different cultural frames that different languages or structures may impose on the language or the linguistic act. And so this early thinking and the comparative thinking about language certainly influenced the way I understand what my role as a linguist is today.
And what I'm swimming with questions, but I guess one question I have is about, like, how important language is for our culture now, and like, even in the United States, I think people are paying a lot of attention to the language we're using, and maybe more so than in the past. I think you're right to say, having been educated here. So what are some modern applications of the work that you're doing in comparative linguistics that maybe a layperson who's not a linguist or specializing in language studies might relate to?
Right. There are various applications. Obviously, one application of thinking about language is in the very classes we teach about, for example, as I mentioned, language and thought, or even in philosophy, the way we think about the role of language. Also in teaching, when it comes to teaching, as I've been doing recently, bilingual populations, for instance, bilingual people are by definition very comparative because they live in these two or possibly more languages and at the same time they try to negotiate two different ways or cultural frames that come with these languages. So as I talk with many of these people in my capacity as the director of the Center for Hellenic Studies recently, and as I engage with communities like in the school communities where Greek and English is being taught, I can see some of the difficulties that people may face when they try to switch from one mode of speaking to the other, or when they engage in code switching, or they switch very rapidly. So there's a lot of things that a linguist can do in studying these ways of speaking and in extracting conclusions about what these ways of speaking tell us about human language and human cognition in general. Because I mean, we must say that language is a window to cognition. Again, like in the Greek parlance, logos is something that stands for both language and thinking. And again, going from one language to the other, or even studying how two or more languages coexist in one's cognitive capacity, can be very informative about language and cognition.
That's something I had never heard before about people who hold more languages in their head being more competitive, and I've never thought about how that can. Yeah, I've been jealous of people who can speak more languages.
I don't want to sound too critical, and I'm not, but it is, studying a different language was not valued very much in the United States because, frankly, English-speaking people didn't have to ever find themselves in this position of not being able to communicate in their own language, because everybody, wherever you go, people tend to speak English. But being in Europe or growing up, like for me, growing up in Greece, if you just look at the map, you're surrounded, you have Albania, they speak Albanian. You had Yugoslavia, they spoke a bunch of like Slavic languages. You had Bulgaria, they speak Bulgarian. You have Turkey, they speak Turkish. Like right there within, I don't know, 2-3 hours, you move to countries that speak different languages. So it's likewise, if you live in the Netherlands, right across the border, half an hour away, they speak German. 2 hours south, they speak French. It's you understand this linguistic relativity or linguistic diversity, I should say, in a very real and meaningful way.
I think going back to graduate school and defending your dissertation in Dutch, and you mentioned that you had various faculty on your committee. Can you go back to that time or time since or before? Who have been the biggest supporters of you on your academic journey?
Right. That's an excellent question. So I was very fortunate to have people such as my advisor, Professor Franz Parts. He's now retired, and I sadly missed his retirement party because I had to be at a conference. I feel very bad about this. But Franz really trusted in me. He didn't know me. He saw me as an Erasmus student. I was very active and tried to prove and do my best to convince people that I was worth investing in for the future. He created a scholarship position for me. I must say that the Netherlands does not have a graduate school the way the United States does. So positions arise based on professional needs that professors have. So Franz Schwarz decided to give me this opportunity and created a scholarship for me, which I got. And it was a 4-year scholarship. And I worked hard with him and another professor there, Jack Huxema, who is both remain very dear friends. And I feel that I owe them a lot. It was very important that I had these people in my life to trust me and to give me every opportunity. I must also say that the Dutch system was quite generous at the time. I had a very good scholarship. It was for 4 years, which was enough time for me to complete a dissertation. I know nowadays we think of writing a dissertation as something that requires more time, and some students need considerably more time. But 4 years worked really well in my case. I was motivated to publish, to produce, and to be timely. And I had every support I needed. Of course, being in the Netherlands was again a different cultural frame for me. The Netherlands was not like Greece, and I did feel a bit different sometimes, compared to my Dutch colleagues or American. We also had a few American students there. But I felt overall that it was very multicultural, very welcoming, very cosmopolitan even. And it was an environment conducive to learning and expanding and opening your mind. I really think of my years back in Holland very fondly.
Mm. How about when you came to the States, and did you come directly to the University of Chicago?
Yeah, so I was at the University of Amsterdam at the time, and on an assistant professorship, and then the opportunity arose for me to be here, and I moved here, as I said, in 2001. Initially with my son, who was just a few months old at the time. I was a visiting professor then, and then in 2002 I was offered an assistant professorship at the Department of Linguistics. I have to acknowledge Professor Jerry Sadok, who was like our mentor, my mentor at the time here. He was wonderful. He was the one who put me up for early tenure, and he was again there responsible for my promotion to full professor. Everything happened really quickly after that. I was very fortunate to, again, have been given every opportunity and have been very supportive. Dean Janelle Mueller was the dean at the time when I moved to Chicago, and she was a very dynamic and understanding and enthusiastic woman. Her husband was also a professor of Greek philosophy. And I remember we had a few conversations. It was wonderful. I felt that by coming to Chicago, I came to a very intellectually active and rich environment, and I was very happy.
So how about you're talking about supporters? Was there resistance at all or opposition that you had to get past?
Yeah, there's always opposition. There's always opposition in the sense that, becoming someone in the academy, and this is not just for linguistics, I think it holds for every field, requires that you publish. So publishing is a very important thing we do, and publishing involves often peer review. You also need sometimes to compete with others to get grants, and these all involve competition. So it depends on how you see competition. Often, some things are harder to publish than others. And I guess the opposition that one needs to face is, when you view the general community, the community of your peers, and you need to present your ideas, and you need to refine your ideas for publication and make sure that they get as sharp and as clear as possible for people to understand them and to use them. I guess that is the resistance that I personally met. I think it's also important to realize, and I suppose I can say this as an advice to younger scholars as well, that when you write something or when you inquire and you engage with ideas, it is inevitable that some people will like the way you engage and the way you interpret things. Some others will not, and you can never go by a principle such as be liked by everybody. And this is not going to work.
It's not a good goal, really.
Exactly. If you truly engage with ideas and what you think is true, and if you go around proving your claims, there will always be those that will disagree with you. And then I always welcome that. Again, I think by nature I'm also someone that enjoys debate and enjoys having adversary positions. I have taken adversary positions myself towards my own writings, and of course also towards the writings of others. And I take certain joy in playing this Socratic role. Remember, like if you are familiar with the Socratic method, or if you've ever read any Platonic dialogues, you will see that there is sometimes joy in this engagement with the opposite in trying to figure out. And so I like that. And so even when there are challenges, I think of, adversary positions not as, adversary, but more as challenges towards like discovering what is true.
Yeah, that is interesting that we tend to use the term challenge in a conversation like this as a negative, as opposed to, like in a sporting event, we see challenges as like, that's the whole point, is to go up against one another and sort of raise each other's level of achievement by.
Isn't that interesting? In a sporting event, precisely, being challenged, having to face difficulty, applying discipline is something that is valued as necessary in order to achieve. Yeah, and I think, the same principle holds for the academy and for the intellectual effort. You need to challenge yourself. You need to engage with opposite or different viewpoints. And I think you produce better science if you do that.
Yeah. And you were mentioning within those comments that the idea of advice for young scholars to not be afraid of being challenged. What are some other advice that you might have for people thinking about linguistics as a field of study?
Right. So one thing that I would definitely advise to young scholars is, to be curious about language, genuinely curious, to be in that state of, again, I'll mention a Greek word, aporia, which is the Greek word for wonderment. Sometimes we have the word aporetic in English. It's like to wonder about about language, if you're interested in linguistics or whatever else you might be interested in. When you truly wonder, you see all the roads open. So approach these questions with an open mind, and not approach these questions just because you want to prove something, or because, you heard someone saying, oh, that's an interesting question to do, so I'm just doing it. I think, underlying wonderment and curiosity should be there for every problem that we want to approach. Not be afraid of difficulty. That would be another question. Like, I think there's genuine pleasure in loving hard problems. I mean, easy problems or easy solutions are, maybe not as satisfying.
Boring, yeah.
They're boring, exactly. A lot of excitement comes from, going into new territory and, discovering new answers or rehashing old problems in new ways, but with a genuine idea to reach, an explanation, and not just regurgitate certain things that others say. And I say that because I find that in academy, we tend to do more and more of that, like rehashing or regurgitating, rather than in like really rethinking or, revising or reshaping and re-engaging with ideas the way I think we should be doing. Yeah. And again, the road will not be easy. It never is easy. But I think that if people take joy in that process of discovering, it will only be good. And, be open to also change, like, your interests might change and they might evolve. There is a sense of evolution in everybody's thinking. I think, in my professional years, in my years as a linguist here in Chicago, a lot of my own interests evolved based on also often the people that I have collaborated with, the kinds of structures that I have been embedded in. Like now that I'm working with the Center for Hellenic Studies, for instance, I am doing more of reading of ancient Greek philosophy, and I'm trying to re-engage and revisit some of my older writings and ideas in a new light. That's evolution. That's a good thing. Yeah, and I think that's this process of always learning and always realizing how much you don't know. It's a very refreshing and renewing process. And it also helps the scholar to renew their enthusiasm about the topic, which I think is a prerequisite for any kind of progress. You need to be enthusiastic and excited.
So what other things beyond your work in research and teaching, are there other things other applications of your scholarship that are keeping you excited about?
Yeah. So definitely, I'm very excited right now with this program we have, which is called Refresh Your Greek. We, as the Center for Hellenic Studies is growing, one thing that we invest a lot is in this bilingual populations, Greek English, and teaching and developing curricula for people that were native speakers of Greek at a time as they were learning Greek as a young children, but then left Greek as they evolved into the society and used only English. So we have this program to refresh the Greek language skills. We also have we invested a lot in developing a curriculum for modern Greek here at the University of Chicago, and we have a growing body of students. So we're very excited about the teaching of Greek. As I said, I personally learn a lot when communicating with these people that are interested in learning the language. I'm also involved in writing 2 books. One is in Greek. Curiously, I haven't written in Greek since my master's thesis in 2002. Yeah, which I think is a long time. And writing in Greek is actually quite interesting right now because I am used to writing in English. So it takes a little bit of effort to write in Greek, and you do realize that you enter different modes of discourse. It's really quite interesting to see like academic writing in one language and academic writing in another language. They're really different. And so that's also a challenge for me, but I'm excited. I'm writing a book about language and persuasion. So this is again something that I'm very interested in right now. A lot of the models that we had as semanticists, so as these special linguists, which we are studying meaning, all these theories that we had about cooperative conversation and certain rules that are followed when people communicate to extract truthful messages, a lot of this needs to be revisited and enriched, and in order to be able to account how communication persuasion works in public fora such as Facebook or Twitter. And I really want to be able to study this in more detail in the future. This is something that intrigues me at the time. Also, other questions that don't only have to do with language, but also with trust, like how is information packaged and what are the tropes in the particular ways information is packaged that help you trust what you read or distrust what you read. The way belief is formed, this is also something that we need to see, like through how things are being said, how people end up having certain beliefs about things. And these are very important questions. They all concern language, but in a more public way and in a more pragmatic way, in the sense that they concern how language is being used in order to affect certain things in the world. And I think that I'm very much interested in this question right now.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question that does connect that contemporary to the ancient or the foundational language, as you were saying, in terms of the logic of language and how it seems like so much of discourse in the public sphere now is illogical.
There's actually research that shows that, Jody. There are papers that show that we have in public discourse ascending use of words such as emotion, feeling, harm, words that have to do with emotional states, and less use of words such as rational and so forth. So it's really interesting that you mentioned it, because it has been measured, and we see that, yeah, we tend to move into this more irrational, not necessarily rational discourse. Yeah. And so we need to think about what that means and why it happens and in what specific areas of public discourse it happens.
Yeah.
Hopefully we want it to happen less in science and in scientific discourses. It certainly happens a lot in political discourses, that's for sure. But definitely, I think that we as linguists that study meaning should be at the forefront of studying how language is used in this way and how and what the patterns are that establish certain ways of speaking that can then lead to belief or knowledge and persuasion. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I wish you great luck with that work, and I look forward to, I hope that we hear more about the study of linguistics in the mainstream media. And, for those of us who are not in the hallowed halls of the University of Chicago, to hear more about your work and the implications it could have for all of our lives.
Thank you. Thank you, Jody. I must say that the University of Chicago is a great place to be able to, to ask these questions and pursue this type of research, because historically it has been an environment, a highly intellectual environment, and an environment that values a lot, inquiring and, free thinking. And I think it's great. It's a good environment to be able to do this type of work.
Thank you.
Linguistics is highly relevant, my dear Jody. Like sometimes people, I must say also this, sometimes people say, oh, this is just a question of semantics, okay, which is really a question about meaning. But this is such a simple and naive statement. There's so much into meaning. There's so much into language and what we package in the words we say and in the way we say them, that it's a very simple thing to say it's just semantics. Semantics involves a lot of texture and a lot of action. And I think one of the greatest applications of linguistics nowadays is indeed to study public discourses and be able to uncover the structure and the patterns that establish belief and trust. We have a great job ahead of us.
Thank you for your time today, Professor Giannakidou. And course takers, if you enjoyed listening to today's interview, please check out the other ones. Leave us a comment, subscribe, follow, and share this episode with your friends and family. You can find out more about the University of Chicago through uchicago.edu or the university's campus in Hong Kong through uchicago.hk. Stay tuned for more.